Hello everyone, Freemantle here. Ever watch a debate, a presidential debate maybe? I've always thought they have some value as entertainment, and I'm not being facetious in saying that. But I have never seen a formal debate that was serious about ideas. A debate is serious about the people debating. It's a contest, it's a display of prowess. That's how people judge who won. That's how the debate's sized up afterwards. Who was faster on his feet? Who had funnier stories, better audience contact? Who did the better job of one-upping his opponent? What's all that got to do with ideas? Don't we think it's possible that somebody could have the best idea but get tongue-tied trying to explain it? Maybe it's a serious idea, and the fellow doesn't think it's appropriate to make jokes. And how about taking a complex social issue and trying to shoehorn it into a formal debate format? Well, you'll have 2 minutes to state your position, then we'll have a minute for questions from the other side, then back to you for 3 minutes. That's not serious about ideas. If we want to think seriously about some issue in foreign policy or the economy or the environment or you name it, we have to get away from thinking in terms of a clash of people. We want to spend our time with the issues. We want to examine the problem. We want to take a close look at the solution that's being urged. What are the person's reasons for saying that? What is his evidence? What's his proof? In short, and in a word, what are his arguments? What are his arguments, and how good are they? And what does his opponent say on the issue? And we want to give the opponent the same hot foot. What we're after is the truth of the matter. Not who was victorious, but what's the truth? We're interested in a clash, all right, but it's a clash of ideas, not people. The object is never to make one side or the other look foolish, stupid, or evil. The object is to get to the truth. Many people think that when it comes to a social issue, you really get down to the nitty-gritty when you deal with concrete cases, real-life, detailed situations. When Mr. Obama was running for a second term as president, I came across a webpage where somebody had posted some thoughts about how candidate Obama should be debating the Republicans. This was before the Republicans had chosen Mr. Romney, and there were half a dozen or so contenders for the nomination. The writer thought Mr. Obama would wipe the floor with all of them if he pointed up 5 Democratic accomplishments. I can only remember one of them, and only the subject of that one. It was the number of jobs that had been created under some democratic circumstances. And here's the important point. These 5 suggestions for Mr. Obama were the letter writer's idea of really getting down to cases. And they were all exactly that superficial. The number of jobs that had been created in a particular situation. Now, superficial does not mean unimportant. A man has a traffic accident, we look at his arm, we see gouts of blood arcing out of the wound. That's superficial, it's right at the surface. But if the bleeding doesn't stop, he's going to die. The gouts of blood are superficial, but they're also important. If we want to deal with this medical emergency the best way, though, we don't just wrap a bandage around the wound to stop up the flow of the blood. We think about the underlying cause. Well, a vein's been cut. And that's what we focus on. We put on a tourniquet to stop the flow of blood in that vein, and that's how we save his life. The superficial is important here, but it doesn't get us to the root of things, to the solution of the problem. To solve the problem, we examine the situation, the man's bleeding, and we get to the principles involved. The blood comes out because the vein is severed, and we focus on the principles in order to get the medical emergency taken care of. The principles are the nitty-gritty. That's especially how we proceed if the problems and issues at hand are very important, which, on this channel, they are. We get to the principles here. The videos are about some of the so-called first things in human affairs, about how we ought to live and how we can get along together. I can't think of anything more important in life than that. I talk about particular social issues and politics and morality. I don't know any particulars more important than those. One thing I talk a lot about is liberals and liberalism. I mean the contemporary political left in America. because it's a driving element in the world we're living in its problems, and in the solutions to those problems. And I look closely at arguments by liberals for their beliefs, the reasons they have, the thinking behind what they say, and we'll look at some arguments against what they believe. Some real-life examples here and there, but far more important, as you will have anticipated, the principle of the thing, whatever we're talking about. So, for a start, you should understand what I mean when I say liberal or leftist. I use the two words that mean the same thing. Welfare state politics aren't political. Not fundamentally. They begin in an orientation to the world, by which I mean a way of conceiving the nature of man and the world and the relations between them. From that, the liberal draws his ideas of what society has to be if human beings are going to have their best shot at living a good life. And from that come the welfare state politics. Liberal politics answer two questions. What do we owe one another as persons? Not in our various social roles or occupations, but just as other people. What do we owe them? Second, how should we deal with people who have things we want? The liberals' answers to these two questions have been the consensus in America for decades. If there was a social morality of our 20th century, if there's a social morality of our 21st century to date, liberalism is it. In fact, tracking its consequences in our history, our institutions, our lives in the last 100 years, our question should be, where doesn't liberalism lead? Despite the variety of its manifestations, though, there is a fundamental liberalism. It can be stated in four principles. Number one, other things equal, the good of society as a whole has higher priority than the interests of the individual. 2, the democratic political process is the best way to establish or maintain the elements of social life. 3, the basic needs of any person should be met before any other needs or desires of people are met. And 4, the bedrock liberal idea. It may sound strange when it's stated explicitly, but because it is the bedrock, we keep running into it. And without it, very little is left of liberalism. The ordinary adult individual is inadequate for living if he just acts out of his private resources of thought and action. So roughly, society as a whole, democratic process, basic needs, inadequate individual. I call these four principles basic liberalism. They're the core of what I mean when I say liberal or leftist. People strongly committed to them in their lives I used to call ideological liberals in my early books. Now I call them intellectual liberals. I didn't appreciate how the word ideological has been polluted by Marxists and American journalists. To them the word means biased and blind. I hadn't meant to disparage anybody, only to indicate that this brand of liberalism comes out of a whole worldview, and to distinguish these liberals from people who are liberal for a different reason. These other people believe that liberal programs and policies are just needed to solve urgent, practical problems. These are the people who would say, the government has to manage the economy. You want depressions all the time? Or Social Security, my God, what would I do without it? I call these people pragmatic liberals. Mostly in these videos, I talk about intellectual liberals and their ideas, because their beliefs are more basic, their beliefs are driving liberalism, and make possible the welfare programs, the government regulations, and so forth that the pragmatic liberals support. Now someone might say, well, my Uncle Harry has been a stout liberal for 45 years, Democrat, a union man, man for the underdog, and he doesn't believe half of what you call liberal. Well then, Uncle Harry is probably a pragmatic liberal, or maybe he's inconsistent. But I should tell you how I came to use the name liberal the way I do. I wanted to think and write about real McCoy liberalism, not the beliefs of the fence-sitters, the inconsistent, people who are liberal here and non-liberal over there. So I began with what people announce as their own political views when they call themselves liberal, what they do, what people they call liberals say and do, and what people say and do who are called liberals by self-identified non-liberals. I drew up three categories, roughly nature of man, good society, good politics. You have to have all three to do justice to the liberal vision. I took the liberal views I had gathered and put them into the three categories. Then I refined the categories by more of what people say and do. And finally, I formulated the views in each category as a principle, altogether the set of four. I tweaked them so they'd be consistent with one another, and a person wouldn't be paralyzed by indecision if he actually tried to live by them. In other words, I tweaked the four principles into a liberalism for action and activities in the real world. And I called the four principles basic liberalism. So if it's objected that what I mean by the word liberal is not what most people mean, or not what the objector means, I reply, I'm dealing with certain ideas, whatever they're named. If people mean something different by the words liberal or leftist, they'll still be able to understand what I mean, and they'll be able to judge what I say. The ideas are what count in the end, not what they're named. My position is that each of the four principles of basic liberalism fails. They do not give us good guidance for life or society. They should be rejected because they don't, which is to say, they should be rejected for moral reasons. They should be rejected because they are morally wrong. Specifically, the failures are these, and I spell this out in the videos on this channel. Number one, the good of society as a whole has higher priority than the interests of the individual, other things equal? No. If you launch a serious inquiry to find out what makes something good, you have to have a certain self-esteem. And out of that self-esteem come, ready for it, objective values. From these objective values, it follows that plans you make for your own life as an end in itself, not for the good of society, should have your highest priority. Second principle of basic liberalism. The democratic political process is the best way to establish or maintain the elements of social life? No. That principle is hopelessly at odds with an extremely strong right of personal sovereignty coming from the objective values. Third liberal principle. The basic needs of any person should be met before other needs or desires of other people are satisfied. In other words, everyone should have bread before anybody has cake? No. Because the liberals' argument for distributing good things on the basis of need doesn't work. And four, the bedrock liberal belief, the ordinary adult is basically inadequate, just acting out of his private resources of thought and action? No. Self-sufficient thinking in the ordinary adult enables him to deal successfully with the problems of an ordinary individual life. On a positive note, I talk about a free society in these videos, so you should understand what I mean by that phrase also. Everybody pays lip service to freedom, and everybody wants personal liberty. That is, absence of restraint by human agency, so you can do what you want to do, have what you want to have, be what you want to be. But having personal liberty is not the same thing as living in a free society. Because in a free society, the other guy's free too. And that can create problems for you. A free society is not the welfare state with the welfare lopped off. It is not a matter of striking down all the government regulations, sitting around for 15 minutes, and then enjoying prosperity on a free market. A free society has its own dynamics. It has its own tensions, problems, failures, and its own characteristic successes. It's not easy to establish one, nurture it, or maintain it once you have it. Look at what happened in America. But a free society is worth it. By free society, I mean one in which the vast bulk of the population agrees that the most important thing that can come from a government is protection against physical attack. These people would add a few other things to the list, such as protection against fraud, but it would be a very short list of things that should come from a government. Because for the vast bulk of people in a robust, ongoing, free society, a person's first moral right is to be able to live his own independent life for his own independent purposes and to build a life of his choosing on that. And if people are going to live that way, political restrictions, controls, regulations have to be cut to the barest minimum. I say more about this too in other videos. I intend to construe liberalism as strongly as I can. I believe it's morally wrong and that it's had horrific consequences. But it never does any good just to knock down a straw man or pounce on ideas that just happen to be worded badly. You have to go against ideas in the strongest possible form. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. And then you have to make the right arguments against what you're opposing. I don't make the standard conservative arguments because I believe they're off the track. Certainly, in my experience, they haven't been very effective. The videos on this channel are about how we ought to live together. I say liberal principles are part of the wrong answer to that question. I say that freedom and respect for the lives of other people and the motto of a free society are parts of the right answer. The motto of a free society is, live and let live. Thank you for listening, and welcome to the channel.